The airport. The place of desolation and misery.
Not going to need that boarding passes, are we?
Leave me alone. I am vegetable.
And confusion.
Bob.
Is that recording?
Bob. Bob.
The Adventures of Bob. The Curse of the Vegetable. Bob woke up with a start, which is always better than an ending, as this story would be briefer than a squirrel in a mankini. Stop it.
Oh, I think we're going to lose now. Carry on. Carry on. Carry on.
People are looking at me.
Carry on.
He looked in the mirror and wept. He had shape-shifted once again. He had never liked rhubarb and had never
Come on, pull it together.
and had never for once thought he'd end up being one. He felt a fool, but he wasn't going to crumble. It was the day of the big race, and the thought of coming first didn't even cross Bob's simple mind. He didn't realise it was an option. On this particular morning, his flatulence levels were woefully low, due to the leanness of the braising steak his stupid and inconsiderate mother had force-fed him from the time of his miserable and inconsequential birth. Within the hour, he was due to compete in the blue ribband event, the Biddy Boom. This, of course, was an acronym for its fuller and more proper title: biodiverse inventions, directly driven by your blow-off originated methane. Are we on?
We're on.
This is a take.
Yeah.
Take one.
Action.
Bob woke up. Oh, chapter 2. Bob woke up in a mist of sweat. His garage was like a tropical rainforest filled with poultry, but this was nothing compared to his bedroom, a desert wasteland populated solely by shell-shocked geese and a lone pheasant masquerading as a parking attendant with a lisp. At that moment, the doorbell rang. It was Bob's old school friend, Wayne. He had come to deliver a package. Wayne led the camel through the hallway and into the parlour. He offered to make a cup of tea, but the basic and inherent fact that camels are clumsy put pay to that idea. Bob's initial disappointment at being the recipient of a camel was quickly dispelled by the realization that the camel was in fact only the bearer of said package, which was underslung and hanging on a single silken thread. Bob made a sudden and somewhat frantic movement towards the package, but this startled the camel, who was on his fourth attempt at pouring tea. Chaos ensued.
Fantastic. So, could you do the underslung movement again? Because I missed that.
Underslung.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, we're rolling.
You're throwing me. Bob, don't sob. Just take comfort in your corned beef cob.
Rolling.
Bob, don't flop. Just because some slob told you to shut your gob. Bob.
Which way round?
Go for it, sorry.
We're ready.
Yeah, rolling.
Chapter 3. Bob was woken by a thud. A sheep had rent the lining of his tent asunder, and the crystalline rain cascaded.
Cascaded. Okay, cut. Okay, action.
Take 2.
Action.
Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Bob was woken by a thud. A sheep had rent the lining of his tent asunder, and the crystalline rain cascaded through the hole like a fondue. Bob leapt from his sleeping bag, thus displacing the family of nesting owls, who would in time drag Bob through the courts, seeking recompense for his misdemeanor. The pungent smell of the owls left Bob with no alternative. He grabbed his mitre saw, which he knew was his only chance of redemption, the softening of the angles. After averting this potential international faux pas, Bob relaxed and once again returned to the comfortable familiarity of his seaweed fetish pamphlet. Bob's camping trips had never gone well. He recalled his recent camping escapade on the slopes of Brill, where he'd had a run-in.
Oh. Hang on. Okay, carry on. A run-in.
Bob's camping trips had never gone well. He recalled his recent camping escapade on the slopes of Brill, where he'd had a run-in with a drunken whelk who was wearing nothing but a doily to cover its rather swollen Mars bar extensions. Bob ended up cooped up for 3 days in his retrofitted motorised bivouac anorak. Camping wasn't for him. He knew it. Camping wasn't... Shut up!
Go on.
Bob ended up cooped up for 3 days in his retrofitted motorised bivouac anorak. Camping wasn't for him. He knew it, and so did the whelk.
Go for it, son.
Chapter 4. Bob's wife, Feta, had seen this behaviour before. He had wildly turned and thrashed in his sleep on previous occasions, but this time was different. The realisation had dawned on Bob. He was dreaming. The trick was how to wake up. The fear of existing within this dreamscape was even worse than his aversion to mollusks, and his friends... Did that wrong?
Just start again. Not from the start.
The fear of existing within this dreamscape was even worse than his aversion to mollusks, and his so-called friend's insistence on bringing up time and again his utter failure in the biddy boom of 74. Feta attempted to wake Bob by gently holding a pillow over his mouth and nose, but this went disastrously wrong and resulted in his first out-of-Bobby experience. He looked down on himself. In fact, pretty much everyone looked down on him, even his best friend, Dobie. Observing his wife's disastrous attempt to wake him resulted in a wave of melancholy, even worse than the day he realised he was allergic to crack. Then the unimaginable happened. His wife, Feta, Bob's beloved, his soulmate, his rock, his best friend, apart from Dobie Soft, his confidant, his other half, his white, crumbly vegetarian option, was swallowed whole by a warehouse containing cheap knitted items imported from Ulaanbaatar. Bob breathed deep.
You know he never performs when you ask him to.
You got any vegetables?
That's great. Go on, mate. Go for it, mate.
Just really off-putting with that one. Chapter 5. Bob walked out into the spotlight. He was on stage again. His band, Darth Hewitt and the Turnitups, was headlining this year's Front Room Festival, which was once again being hosted by Bob's... Oh, flip it out. Start again. Are we just carrying on with the take, yeah? Take 2, Chapter 5.
Achte bitte, der Abflug des Halbfahrtfluges 22 nach Süden nach Paris erfolgt nun am Ausgang B 45 departure of Flight 2207 to Paris will be now at
As we make it right.
8:75.
Don't put it up my nose.
Don't.
Don't. Do you want me to take? If you do you want to, can we take this seriously, please? Chapter 5. Bob walked out into the spotlight. He was on stage again. His band, Darth Hewitt and the Turnitups, was headlining this year's Front Room Festival, which was once again being hosted by Bob's friends, Wayne, Dobie Saft, and the Sarge. The set was just about to begin when Bob's mum burst in with a tray of sugar-coated hubcaps that had been surreptitiously removed from a tabletop dancer whose career had been ruined by a bad case of vertigo. Bob was livid. His banjo solo had been ruined. He'd been practicing his hammer-ons for weeks now, so much so that he'd developed a nasty case of white finger. What followed was to become known as the hub-cap snap. In a fit of unadulterated rage, Bob launched the banjo at his bemused mother. His aim, however, was poor, and the projectile only succeeded in sending the hubcaps flying in all directions. The largest and most heavily sugar-coated hubcap struck the Sarge with such force that the impact could be felt for days afterwards. It snapped him fully in half, revealing several secret chambers where abided entire armies of the apocalypse and the remains of a hot dog. Bob's musical career had ended as his stretch in prison began. I made a right mess of that all over the shop. Chapter 6. A shaft of light fell oh so softly on Bob's face through the bars of his homemade prison. Racked with guilt, and fraught with shame, and paralysed by fear, and tormented by an overactive cluster of mutant hemorrhoids that had taken up residence in his knee pit, Bob awoke in a flood of despair. Bob leant on the makeshift bars of his prison cell that had been lovingly constructed from breadsticks and sellotape. It broke under his substantial weight. The smell made him hungry, and so he quickly devoured the sellotape without sparing a single thought for the light switch. And then, as if by magic, the Sarge emerged from the ottoman, dressed in Bob's late wife Fetta's favourite evening attire and a hard hat. His whole lower half had been reconstructed with lollipop sticks, spaghetti, Meccano, copy decks, and a pirate copy of Dex's Midnight Runner's latest release. In shock, Bob vomited, and then soiled himself, and then weed himself, and then sneezed, and then barked like a dog, and then meowed like a cat, and then made a sandwich. Bob was in turmoil. Bob quickly realised that the time had come for him to get himself sectioned.
Simon, come back.
What?
Don't be shy.
I'm not shy. Why? What's wrong with you?